the Allah issue. It was a very difficult thing. There were a lot of resistance from the Muslim community for the Christians to use the word Allah in the Al-Kitab, the Malay version of the Bible. I got lots of criticism when I got engaged with the Christian community because I was asking for a middle ground. So from both sides, I got hit. There was one very senior person in the Christian community. He looked at me, he asked me, "Are you even a Christian?" There were banners in the East Coast that condemned me on the highway, actually. I mean, there were things on the internet. There were some really nasty ones that says, "Your soul will..."
Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon. This is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father-son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith as well. We have been currently on an 8-part series discussing your 8 steps, big fast results methodology exercised in PEMANDU and also in your time at Shell, as well as MAS and the government previously. We already covered steps 1 and 2 in the first episodes. Step 1 was about setting the strategic direction. How do you facilitate workshops to be able to get your leadership to align on your true north? In step 2, which was the previous episode, we talked about labs. So essentially, how do you get the best in the room to figure out detailed action plans in order to arrive at your true north? And now today, in episode 3, we're going to talk about your third step, which is open days. That maybe for those of us who are not aware, can you tell us what an open day is?
Open day is a very simple idea that we have developed where you bring all your key stakeholders, and if it's a company, bring all the employees to come there and listen to the recommendations of the lab in detail. And if it is a government kind of work, then you have an open day and invite public. And you can have the whole day for public to come in and to concede and provide feedback. So what I always find is that when people feel that they are involved in the process and through a lab in the beginning and now through an open day, then you then get commitment and support from them because they now feel part of the process. So the open day is an opportunity to get feedback. You know, you and I covered a lot of reasons why feedback is important in episode 7. And open day is the mechanism to do precisely that. That means you get mass support in an open forum so that you get the support from everybody.
Walk us through what a typical open day looks like.
Yeah, typical open day looks like it's a big hall, like a convention center, and you have in the hall various booths. And in each booth is all the slides and recommendations from the labs are in the booth. And in this booth, the lab leader as well as a facilitator or a representative from the lab will be manning the booth and then taking the people when they come to the booth, explaining to them the recommendations of the lab. Why these recommendations, what are the analysis. The data is all plastered within the confine of that booth. And so when people come there, we call it a gallery walk. This is the gallery, the booth, and people move from gallery to gallery. And each time they do it, then they listen to the recommendations, they see the analysis, see the data on the wall in the booth. They also are then asked for feedback. The feedback can be verbal, directly on the spot, or it could be written. And we give them the post-it notes, they stick post-it note with their comments and input. Alternatively, virtual. You can ask them to maybe use Slido, they can click and then provide an input. The key here is that people must visibly know that you're interested in their input. And that's why it's important to get it in writing, and they will verbally mention it. And then you make commitment that you really intend to do that. That's how the booths are laid out. But what I didn't mention to you right in the beginning, an excellent open day should begin right at the beginning where the key sponsor of this activity, if it's a company, the CEO would stand and make a speech about the open day, explaining why it's so important to do that. If it's to do with work that you're doing in government, you would expect the Prime Minister or the President to make the opening remark, to tell the people why it's so important that we get their input and feedback to this work.
So if we go back to previous episodes and
Yeah.
how some best practices for how do you bring plans into action. There's often also, we've also said how usually during the labs we have various touch points for syndication to ensure that whatever we do that we continually align ourselves, whether it's with leadership or other stakeholders as we go, in order to avoid double work. Now, in this case, how do you deal with instances where you've obviously done your labs, you've had all of your various syndications already. Now you're bringing it to a public forum where you're going to be open to further criticism. How do you then rework some of your plans if they require a bit of refining and tweaking? What's the way that you go about doing that after having spent so many weeks in the lab refining your plan? Now going back to the drawing board, has that ever happened, and how did you deal with
It happens all the time. So what we tend to do is that at the end of the open day, all the inputs are collated and then they're brought into the lab. So the lab will reconvene to make amendments because the lab isn't finished until they produce their actual report. The finalization of the report is done after the open day. So they come back to the drawing board and make modifications as necessary, and that's how it is done.
How do you manage your team's expectations? I'm sure some people will feel maybe a little disheartened having spent so long working on their plans, only to then go back to those plans and revisit them.
The way to manage this, to tell them right up front in the lab that the work is not finished until you have gotten the feedback from the public. So you manage expectations so that they expect that to happen. And also, we must also tell them that the open days is an opportunity to receive gifts from the employees and the public. So when you receive gifts, it is something that you should take, really treasure it, because you are serious about implementation, and if you're serious about results that are coming out from the lab work, you really need to take serious account of the feedback and comments from the key stakeholders, i.e. the employees and the public. It's very important. And so you must explain right in the beginning to the labs why the work is not completed until the open day is done and the report's completed.
Yeah, I think Aristotle said that criticism is something that we can avoid easily by saying nothing, doing nothing, and being nothing.
Yeah.
So I think by getting your plans, getting your commitments out there to the public, that kind of forces you into action.
Leon, you read many management books, and they will tell you one of the big reasons why things don't get implemented is because there's not enough buy-in. There's not enough support. There's not enough commitment to the things that you do. That is why this is important. And particularly in government, if you have an open day for tough reforms that you intend to implement, the open day is an opportunity to deal with them right up front. You don't go and announce a completed reform, a proposal, without getting the feedback, because then you get the brickbats from everybody. And that is why when we were doing the work in government, when I was there, we did the subsidy rationalization. We explained exactly to the people why we had to go and do this, and showing them the numbers and showing them the comparative practices in other countries. And people understand this. It's very important to make sure that you do your job right up front. Because if you don't do the open day, when you get into implementation, you get the same criticism, in fact, even more vigorous, robust criticism. And so you might as well deal with them right up front. If I recall, the first time we had an open day I think it was 2010, if I'm not exactly mistaken the date, late 2009 in government. When we had it, there was a lot of reluctance from the civil servants to do this, and politicians too. They're saying that if we're going to do this, we'll be nailed to the wall from the public for some of the tough measures that we intend to do. So I explained to them this is the way to do it. And when we did it, they were quite shocked that the feedback was very positive. I remember, and I was working together with Lim Kit Siang, he was leader of the opposition in DAP. He walked through the booth and he was looking at the booths and all the changes that we were proposing to make, including on corruption, because we had a booth on corruption, we had a booth public transport, we had a booth on low-income household, on education, we had a booth on rural infrastructure. You know what he said? He looked at them. Wow, I like this. This is exactly what I've been saying for the last 20 years. So you notice now, if you then see even the opposition acknowledging that the work that is being put there in such levels of detail, and they support it, that's a huge step forward in implementation. And that is why I believe that if you do this, do the open day, and you get the support from all strata of society, and in the case of corporates, the whole strata, all the departments inside there, you're going to get a fantastic opportunity for implementation.
What might this look like for maybe a smaller organization?
Yeah.
You know, maybe you're not a publicly listed company. You are just a small, let's say you're a fashion retailer.
Yeah.
What might this look like for a small
for
SME?
a small SME, I really encourage you to have an open day, invite possible customers to come. People who might buy all the dress and shirts that you're putting out there, then you realize whether they actually will buy your product. And then you might probably put samples of the product that you intend to sell. And if you're smart enough, you put the competitors' one as well and the prices, and explain why yours is good, and explaining to them what is unique about your proposition. They might tell you what you didn't understand from their perspective and make modifications to what you intend to do in terms of pricing, in terms of offer, in terms of the product offering. And so I think this is the way to. The other thing that you will do is that you bring in potential investors. And because many of the SMEs are having difficulty with money, and if you are good as well, not only don't you invite potential investors, you bring the bankers as well. And if the bankers come there, then they realize, wow, this product is going to sell. Because the customers, I can visibly see that they support this. It's great. When we did the same labs in Senegal, we had a lab in Senegal on how to get SMEs to plant more mangoes and cashew nuts. And many of the problems they had then was to do with land, because many of the land didn't have titles. And therefore, the banks were not lending the money because if without title, the land cannot be used as collateral. So we had in the lab, and including the open day, we brought in the bankers as well. When the bankers were there and the people in charge of land reform, they had already made the commitment they will issue and grant the titles. And so at the open day and the labs, we had a full support from the banks to provide all the necessary money to kickstart all these projects. They were altogether 26 projects on mangoes and cashew nuts in the lab that we did in Senegal. It was fantastic. It was the first time, Leon, that I have seen the banks and the investors sitting there in the open day and as well as in the lab, really making commitment to put money into it. And normally funding is a big problem with SMEs. So to recap, bring the customers in the room and bring the potential investors and the bankers in the room. And then you kill many birds with a stone.
Yeah, I think there's something quite powerful about that because, having worked in marketing and branding for most of my career, there's a stat that says that 94% of consumers are generally going to be more likely to be loyal to your brand if you are seen as a transparent company. So I think by doing things like an open day, it's not just you positioning yourself as transparent through your marketing collaterals, but you're actually turning that into action by physically inviting them into your space to present to them your plans, both to the consumer, but also then to potential investors as well. And I think, naturally, if you feel like you are a part of these discussions, if you feel like you have an avenue also to provide feedback, you're no longer just seen as a number, no longer just seen as a consumer, but ultimately as, if you like, a partner with the business as well. whether you're an investor, whether you are a consumer. It reminds me a bit of what we do in our organization. So, for those who are, if this is your first time listening, I work full time for a church, and in our organization we use a HR tool, and this is not a paid sponsorship or anything, but this tool is called Peak On, and what it is it's essentially a monthly survey that we put out, and it's a company-wide survey, and everyone answers a set number of questions. The survey itself is like any other sort of staff health check survey that you would have in any other company. But I think what is interesting is the application of it. So based on your results, this tool, it develops a report. But what's interesting is that this report doesn't just give you merely how well you scored on a certain thing, but it uses what they call a true benchmark.
Right.
Meaning it benchmarks you against other similar organizations. Because a certain score, let's say you score out of 10, you score a 4 out of 10. Just looking at that at face value, it's probably not going to look really great. But perhaps if you are to then be pegged against a true benchmark within another NGO, then within that context, perhaps a 4 is actually above true benchmark. So that's an interesting piece. But I think the more powerful thing is, even if we didn't use that tool anymore, which we don't anymore actually, by the way, because it's quite an expensive tool. Even if you don't use that tool anymore, actually what is more powerful is what we do with that report on a quarterly basis. We would get the whole team together in the room, and then within our town hall, we will actually go through the Peak-On report as an entire team. Yeah. And what's interesting here is that, number one, it shows that there's a commitment to do better at some of the things that perhaps we are not doing so well in. But also, what's interesting is for parts where we are maybe weak, let's say for one season, maybe we notice that there's a pattern because the past 2 times we've done this, maybe we have been scoring poorly in the area of, let's say it's remuneration. Right. People don't feel like they are maybe being rewarded in a monetary sense for their contributions, which is, I think, a typical, it would probably be quite a common scenario for churches to be in. So let's say for those 2 months, that is the issue. Now what we do is, rather than just acknowledging that there's an issue, we then get everyone in our team to break up into small groups. So small groups of, let's say, 4 to 5. And then within your 4 to 5, now let's tackle some of these questions. And we're very transparent about it, because we don't just broad stroke and say this is an issue. We will even include some of the comments. And sometimes people have pretty robust comments as well. So we will address those. And then as a group, now let's figure out potential solutions to address those things. And I think that's good, because not only is it showing, I think, a willingness to just be transparent about where you're not doing so well, to your teams, but then you're also giving them an opportunity to be able to think of the solution. So there's buy-in again. And it also, what we found is that it reduces the chance of town halls turning into kind of, in Malaysia we say a pasar malam, into a marketplace of just people airing their grievances, because now you've got a structure in place for you to have a more solution-oriented approach to doing this. So that's actually been quite interesting for us. Fun fact, we don't use this tool anymore. As I said, it's very expensive. So now what we've done is we've just figured out, okay, we kind of know the structure of the questions. We don't really need that granular level of reporting. Actually, the more powerful thing is just the debrief that we do as a team. So we have since moved to a cheaper option, but then we have used the correct DIY.
Well, that's good, Leon. I mean, that you guys are already doing it in a structured manner within a church context. And I do believe that an open day, and in other countries, in the US, they call it town hall. And this is a town hall, and open day is the same idea. And I remember when we first brought this idea to many different places, there are modifications that are being made. The biggest open day I have ever seen that I've been directly involved was actually in Moscow. We ran a lab for the government in Russia, and at that time when we finished doing it. And then when we conducted the open day, we asked how many people came for the 2 days it was conducted. It was about 75,000 people that came. And because in the work that we were doing is the plan for building roads in the whole of Russia outside Moscow and St. Petersburg for the next 10 years. This was the master plan for the roads infrastructure plan. And there were 70 over different provinces or regions in Russia. And of course, people are interested to know, when are you going to build a road in my province, from where to where, and how it's going to impact them? So lots of people came. And we had the same kind of lab in Nigeria. There was prior to the election. And we conducted a lot of the labs. Then when Open Day came, a lot of people came and visited the Open Day. And you remember, you were there.
I was there.
And we were there. We put in the booths, and lots of people came.
That was my first, actually, my first project when I joined PEMANDU. First
I think
assignment.
We almost had a heart attack preparing for the booth. Do you remember that?
Yep.
Tell me more what you.
I think So we were preparing for the Open Day, and at that time I was in the comms team. So we were preparing all of the collaterals for the Open Day, all of the decks, all the boards. We try to make these Open Days. We try to make them a bit of an experience, so they're not just printouts of your PowerPoint decks. We have actual large-scale installations with all of your key information there, and opportunities for people to interact as well. So there's a lot of setup and installation required. And we had been working with the local vendors there, but much of the planning was done remotely first before we flew in, obviously to manage costs, because at that time that was when the comms unit was then spun off to become a self-sustaining revenue-generating entity as well. So we were brand new, so we had to manage our costs, which meant we managed most of the work remotely first before flying over.
And what happened to the vendor?
And then when we arrived there, we, to our horror, just less than 24 hours before the event was about to start, we realized that work had not begun yet. Work had not begun because certain payments, down the chain had not been made. And so I remember we had to get on a call with a few higher ups to really try to drive certain things. And I still remember one of the funniest things was one of our vendors, the event supplier. She was a lovely lady, really, really excited about the work and very passionate about it, and really wanted to move things along. But she recognized that some of the holdup was because, let's just say, some seniors, some important stakeholders were not processing certain payments. And I remember we were sitting in a cafe panicking, thinking, how are we going to get things going? And then we got on a phone call with her. It was a conference call. And then we had this high-level stakeholder on the line as well. And I just remember her completely yelling at this guy. I mean, this is the supplier, but the supplier completely having a go at this high level stakeholder, and it was really
I remember
funny.
I got involved in the latter part of it. She said very clearly, if I don't see the money in my bank account, the trucks will not move to bring all the booth material to the venue. I need to see it in the bank account. That was what she said. I don't care about the checks, because the checks can bounce. I want to see the money in my bank account, because apparently it happened before. That's why she insisted. I think it was almost at the 11th hour.
Absolutely.
The delivery was then made. I mean, we were on our toes. Really, thousands of people were coming. Can you imagine the president was ill at that time. The vice president was to open it. Can you imagine what it would have been a nasty experience if thousands of people had come to the Open Day and we had no booths? And so,
we had key ministers as well who had to come the day before the rehearsal. So not the VP, but you had some of the ministers who were directly involved in the labs, because this was I think it was called the Economic Recovery Growth Plan, the ERGP. So all of those key ministers who were directly involved, we invited them to come for a rehearsal, a dry run. We invited them to this dry run. I think it was about maybe 1 or 2 p.m.,
Yeah.
only to see that we have nothing to essentially do a dry run with. And so that was an interesting time.
Yeah. But we had some very well organized open day, and I would say
We
one
did.
of the most organized open day was the one we had in Oman.
Yes.
In Oman, it was very organized. Things were to the T. But the only thing about it is so organized that it looked very sterile. It was too organized, but I have no complaints about it. Nothing failed.
Yeah.
It was so organized. Almost people said this doesn't look very real because no spontaneity into it.
Can I ask, how do you, what is your approach to consolidating and then also discerning what feedback warrants any sort of change
Oh
in
yeah,
strategy?
the lab, Leon. I mean, the labs. You must remember, the labs have been on this work for a very long period of time, so they understand the data, they understand exactly the context as well, and they know what is substance, what's noise, and they would have a deliberation after they collect them. Then they will say, "This is noise. This is constructive criticism based on substance," and we will take the ones that are constructive based on this and make substantive amendments to the recommendations based on that. But the noise is something else.
So your parameters are
Yeah.
set during the lab, but
Yeah,
then
yeah.
even after the
After
parameters are
you
set,
come back.
how do you then determine
Yeah.
what gets parked under the noise bucket?
But the labs, you convene the labs, the members of the labs come there and take that, and they will then have a full discussions. What's in the noise bucket, what in the substance bucket for constructive amendments. So I think that's important. And if you let another third party to do it, they don't have the context.
Yeah.
They don't have the data that is done over a rich period, 6 weeks. And so the labs are, those people by the time they really understand the problem. So if the real things come out from people that make suggestions about it in the town hall, they would make them say. I'll give you one example. When we had the lab on the MRT, Mass Rapid Transit in Kuala Lumpur, there was alignment. We knew exactly where the alignment was to be drawn, where the line is to be drawn. And so when the line was to be drawn, there was, at the open day, there were a lot of people making huge criticism about the alignment itself, where it should go, how we should shift it. We did make changes as a result of that because the public feedback was there. There was another key question about if you put it in the area, right, that runs through the city, what happens to the shops that has to be temporarily closed, and what level of compensation has to be paid. And so that was something that we had to make amendments to make sure that we get the right level of compensation when we close the shops for the interim period. When the lines are completed, the MRT is open, they come and reopen it. And so effectively what was done was, the changes there was, we tell the shops, because the work is being done here, your shop is going to temporarily close during the construction, but we will make sure that we'll pay you the full compensation for the income that you would have lost as a result of that. But when it opens, we are convinced that your business will thrive because there are now a lot more people accessing your shops. And so at the time when they looked at it, they say, yeah, this is good, this is fair. So you notice here, this is a substance issue. And we really believe that if you didn't deal with this in the implementation, you get a lot of resistance from the public. And that's why the open day was so important with regards to the MRT. Otherwise, the MRT wouldn't have been built, Leon. We got public support from the open day, and we got all the issues laid out in the open day. And that's why the MRT was completed on time and within budget.
Yeah. Let's take a more kind of, let's look at this from maybe a personal lens now. We all know that really no pursuit or no goal worth pursuing isn't going to come without its share of criticism
Sure.
or naysayers in the process. And you, as a pretty prominent figure, you have received your fair share of criticism. Not just, we've talked about criticism of plans, but you have received personal criticism as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, sure.
What are some ways that you have dealt with criticism like that,
You,
especially when they
yeah,
are when they are not grounded on
yeah.
facts? How do you deal with that?
I mean, I have to say very frankly and honestly, as human beings, Leon, it is hard to take. But you must always remind yourself, you are on for a good cause, and there will be personal criticism that's unfair. You have to learn how to absorb it. And I can give you a very robust example. When I got involved in dealing with the Allah issue, it was a very difficult thing because the use of Allah, there were a lot of resistance from the Muslim community for the Christians to use the word Allah in the Al-Kitab, the Malay version of the Bible. And so I got involved in it. I got lots of criticism when I got engaged with the Christian community because I was asking for a middle ground. And of course, I also got criticism from the Muslim community because the middle ground was not good enough to them. So from both sides, I got hit. And I remember,
Arguably, a bit more from the Christians.
yeah,
Interestingly
absolutely. I mean,
enough,
there was one very senior person in the Christian community. He looked at me. He asked me, "Are you even a Christian?" I asked him, "What kind of question is that?" And so he said, "Why are you putting these kinds of, compromises?" My response was, "I'm a Christian as much as you are, and my faith is as much as deep as yours. But we live in a society that's multicultural, multi-religious, and we have to learn to give and take. And if you don't do a give and take, you get fault line drawn into society, the fabric of society. So I have to stand there and argue my case." And it was very difficult to do that because people, when they're standing at two different poles, and they don't want to give in. And when you don't give in, you cannot come to middle grounds and compromises. Middle ground and compromises can only come when people take a give and take attitude. If it's winner takes all, and you'll never be able to get it. I got a lot of personal criticism. There were banners in the East Coast that condemned me on the highway, actually. I mean, there were things on the internet and comments that were put on Twitter, there were some really nasty ones that says, "Your soul will go to hell." I mean, this is very difficult. So when Jesus said that you can be persecuted for things that you do, I understood exactly what it meant when I was doing that. And so, and it was difficult, but nonetheless, we did get the approval from the whole cabinet. We issued the 10 points solution, and then it was publicly put out there, and there was peace and quiet for at least 2 years until people broke the truce, and then the problems came again. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, these are difficult things, yeah, Leon. Actually, dealing with feedback like that is not an easy when you have to deal with polarities. Polarities is not problem to be solved. Polarities are when people stand on two different poles and they insist that their answers, their solutions is the only one is right. There is no solution in the middle, and that's tough. But you have to work towards getting them to come to the middle ground. Conflicts, like what you see in Israel today with Hamas, that's a polarity. And that's a conflict that's been going on for a very long time, long before you even born. And the Bible says that conflict, that war will never end until the end of the earth. And so all wars in the world have seen a beginning and an end, except this particular one. And this is going to be very difficult. People are deep rooted. I work in Sri Lanka, and you were a kid growing up there. The conflict they had there for many years, it ended. The Berlin Wall came down. The First World War and the Second World War happened. So the problem that you see in the Israeli and the Hamas conflict, Palestine conflict, is a polarity. And that is not a problem to be solved. If people try to solve the problem with one solution, it has to be managed. That means you have to bring people to come to compromises. Really, you have to the real diplomacy needs to come through. You could call it in many other ways, open day and do whatever you like. I remember very clearly we had, many years ago, the late Kofi Annan came to Kuala Lumpur. And I recall a few of us met him for lunch. And a few people were there, Azman Mokhtar, Nazir Razak, they were all there. And we had Kofi Annan. And there were Q&A was put to him, maybe about 10 of us. And there was a question that was posed to him. The time threat that included a few of you, Bill Clinton, and Tony Blair and yourself, why did it fail? And his response was, it failed because we were looking for a political solution to a religious conflict and spiritual conflict. And his views was, I think if we rewind the clock, if you have a spiritual conflict, you need to find a spiritual solution to it. And that is really deep, and that was a comment he made because the combined effort of Bill Clinton and him together with Tony Blair, they could not find any route around it. I think if you get the rabbi and the imam to also sit together and really find a spiritual solution, probably get some very far, because that's the only time people will come to the middle ground, because the conflict is not just about land. It's much more deep-rooted than issue about land. And so I think that's where that's the comment that came out from Kofi Annan.
Yeah. Between feedback that is baseless and feedback that actually has truth, a degree of truth to it, which in your experience has been the tougher one to deal with?
The ones that are difficult to deal with is difficult from a personal standpoint, the brickbats that are noise. From a personal standpoint, because it eats you, it gets inside you. They're difficult to.
I'm glad you think so as well.
Yeah, they're difficult to. And the temptation is, I mean, if you're on X, which is previously called Twitter, the feedback that are coming out from the noise are robust, and so what they're trying to do is to get you into a mudslinging contest in Twitter or X. They want you to join them after the open day so that you get into a mudslinging contest and that you get dirtied as well. I always believe that it's very important. If you want to answer it factually and stop. Because if they're not going to accept the factual response to it, the constructive response to it, you should not engage into any more mudslinging contest. Because what they want is, they want to drag you down. And so what you don't want to do is to be dragged down into that. So you should learn to ignore it. But it's difficult, because once it go viral, people think that you're guilty. But I think you must prevent from getting into that mudslinging contest and do a tit for tat, because that's not going to do you any good. But the changes are simple. You make the changes, people accept that, that's fine.
In my work, both in the past, doing digital marketing, secular digital marketing, and now doing that for a church. I think that there are two things we discern. What's the intent of the criticism or comment? If we sense that this person is, no matter how harsh the feedback is, but if we sense that the feedback is coming from a place of wanting us to improve and do better, and that there are some valid points to it, then that is one thing that we consider. The other thing is, this is a very simple thing, but if the person is commenting from a personal account and you have a sense that this is a real person, then that is also someone we might entertain, because this is a real person, not just someone hiding behind a fake account looking to be, as we say, a troll online. And then the third thing also is, whether or not this person has, whether or not you can sense, and I think this supports your point, whether or not the way that this sort of criticism has been positioned will enable us to have more of a closed loop conversation rather than a piecemeal, because what you don't want to get involved in is then a series of exchanges. So we usually if someone has taken the time to write a very sort of self-contained message about what the key points are, disagreements, whatever it is, but it's very comprehensive. Then to us, we know, okay, that's the frame that you have provided. Now we will respond in a similar manner so that we can just give an answer to address your criticisms, and then the loop is closed. Or we might continue that conversation maybe on DM, private message with that person. But you always want to avoid going into kind of a mudslinging contest.
Yeah.
And then there are some people who are just very obviously trolls. They either just have like a fake account or the criticism that there's no value in addressing it. Unless someone has a completely is saying something that is potentially defamatory, then maybe we might consider it. We might need to say something if no one else has jumped in to do so. But I think that those are some practical ways to look at it. What would your encouragement be to anybody who is thinking about any sort of pursuit, whether it's a large-scale pursuit within an organization, or maybe for a lot of people who are watching this podcast, they might be an individual thinking about doing something that maybe perhaps puts themselves out for criticism, and are maybe a little bit apprehensive about doing that. What would your encouragement be to people like that?
Is very simple. You must remember, if you are afraid of the feedback, of criticism, it means exactly why you need this. Because if you're afraid of criticism, there's a trust deficit. If you're running an organization, the trust deficit is the very reason you are not going to get much in implementation. If you're in government, the trust deficit is another problem. The moment you run the open day, you'll be shocked, almost surprised, how much when you show people the details of what you intend to do, how much that will gain an improvement in trust, that people really believe that you are really meaning to do this. And this is important. Most poorly run organizations have a huge problem with trust deficit. Most governments also have a problem with trust deficit. But if you're a great company, you're doing something great, it's very difficult. You don't have trust deficit, but you have a challenge to move forward. That's when you need a very different approach to it. Let me take the latter part of it. Suppose you have a very good company, and that is Amazon is a good example. And I read a lot about what they're doing in Amazon. Jeff Bezos, when they do their town hall, gathered everybody there and they talk about the specific recommendations and proposals they intend to implement. Jeff Bezos, he puts an empty chair in the town hall. And he turned around to everybody. That empty chair, there's an invisible customer sitting out there. What do you think that customer is saying to our proposal? And when they are talking about cutting costs that sacrifices the convenience to the customer, what do you think that customer is going to say? Now, Jeff Bezos has instituted the empty chair syndrome. That means really making sure that everybody in the town hall understands what the customer would really say to them, and therefore making that as a feedback loop to make changes in the things that they offer to the customer. And that is really very good. And so even a good company, which is the most profitable company, most successful company today, even them in the town hall, they still need that empty chair syndrome. The customer is put out there because Jeff Bezos is the owner and the founder of this company. People cannot ignore him. He takes it very seriously. And this is very, very important. So I think, to summarize, please don't be scared of the open day. And if you're scared, that's the very reason why you need the open day, because you and your organization having a trust deficit. And that's why the open day will improve the position, gaining more trust from your key stakeholders, and that's why you need to do it.
Well, we've covered step 1, step 2, and today we've covered step 3. Next week, we're going to do step 4. Can you give us a short snippet of what we can expect?
Now that you already had the input from the public, you need to incorporate that in the proposal, and then in step 4, we're suggesting that you now must release a roadmap that you publicly declare with all your promises, all your commitments that you intend to implement. The rich roadmap is a form of a document that make you completely pregnant That means the word pregnancy means to say that once you release it with all your promises and commitment that you have made it public, you must deliver. So in the next episode, we're talking about that step. That means the publication of the document, making yourself and the organization completely pregnant, making sure that you have no choice but to deliver.
Looking forward to that, Dad. Thank you so much for joining us on yet another episode of The Game of Impossible. We would just want to encourage you, if you have not subscribed, do subscribe. We have much more coming up. We're currently in this 8-part series, but this is an ongoing podcast series. We have made ourselves very much pregnant in committing to weekly uploads every Friday. So even after this 8-part series is done, we have other episodes as well lined up. So thank you so much for being a part of this journey. If you haven't subscribed to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, but also on our social media channels as well. We post short form content, short form snippets, hot takes on both our Instagram, but also on TikTok as well. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.